Business school leaders from across the world and stakeholders from government, foundations, civil society and the private sector met in Cape Town, South Africa, the 8th and 9th of June. Now, this was the Global Business School Networks at GBSN's 4th annual conference. The 2009 conference had discussed on the response of business schools to the global crisis and on the role of management education in fostering responsible leadership. We're joined now from our Cape Town studios by Ms. Nora Brown, who's the Chief Operating Officer at GBSN. Thank you very much for joining us here on Rendezvous Africa, ma'am. Now, how did the concept of this conference come about?
Well, as you know, the Global Business School Network has been around for the past 7 or 8 years, and this is our 4th annual conference, but the first conference we've had here in South Africa. And we thought it would be the right location, and given the World Economic Forum that's happening right now here in Cape Town, to leverage off the participants here that are here for the WEF Forum as well. And with the business schools, there's a very big question about their role in the crisis and being part of the solution going forward.
Which countries are involved in this conference?
There are many countries involved. We have business schools in the network from the US, across Europe. We've got many countries in Africa represented. We had South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana. So there are countries all over the world that were involved.
And can you tell us a bit more about the topics that came under the spotlight?
Sure. The focus of this year's conference was partnerships and practice. And so really what we try and focus on is leveraging this network and these relationships to turn this into action. So we use these conferences not just to talk, but to move into new programs and new innovations and how to use business schools as tools in national development.
Now, what's the role of business schools in societies? And let's look at the African society.
I think business schools can play a very diverse role in society. There's obviously the traditional role in terms of building up the private sector and the business sector in countries. But because of the way that the skills that they teach and the competencies they teach, they really have a great role in social sectors and in public sectors as well.
Any resolutions that were taken at this conference?
There were a number of things that came out of this conference. First of all, there were a number of fellowships and faculty exchanges that came out of the partnerships created at this conference. I think we have a greater awareness of what's needed moving forward. There's a very ambitious agenda that I think we're looking towards in terms of really using and leveraging business schools as tools in national development. So looking at the health sector and how they might strengthen that, and bringing up agriculture as a viable business option, injecting more management and strategic thinking into public sector as well. And so there are a number of things coming out of this conference I think that we're looking towards doing.
How important, though, is Africa when it comes to these conferences?
It's extremely important. I think that everybody is looking at Africa. It's a major untapped market. In terms of doing capacity building work here, we can have the largest impact in our network as well. And I think that there's a lot of interest and excitement around the power of business schools and private sector in terms of pushing things forward.
How have business schools responded, though, to the global crisis, and how do you look at that?
Well, I mean, I think business schools have caught a lot in the media in terms of their responsibility for creating the crisis, and I don't think that's quite true. I think it's more complex than that. But I think, you know, it's a wake-up call to us all in terms of the way that we are teaching our students and what we're teaching our students and how we can improve on what we've been doing. And it's a real opportunity now to shake things up and to move forward better.
And the management, education, and fostering relationships that are responsible leadership and relationships. When you look at Africa and you look at what business is doing business schools are doing for Africa, what's your part that you're doing?
Well, I think the main role that we're playing is linking up business schools around the world. So they're beginning to talk to each other, learn from each other, learn from what's worked and what hasn't worked. Leveraging off the scarce resources that many of them have available to them, and so coming together to create new programs and to learn, share research and faculty, have student exchanges, and I think it's the facilitation of those relationships that's very important.
Now, when looking at your yearly well, not necessarily discussions, but looking at the syllabus, for example, how often is it that you find African economics as part of what's making headlines?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by African economics and making headlines, but I think that it's growing in importance, and this is something that, you know, we need to pay more attention to. And there's a very strong interest around the world to get more involved in Africa, to understand how to do business here. And this is a great way in which the business schools are learning about the private sector here and how to do business in Africa. And so they take that back to their classrooms, and students are pushing for this. They're very interested and engaged. And so this is opening up doors for them.
Now, you're talking about an African perspective. Let's look at Africans doing business abroad. How do you deal with it, making sure that people understand that?
How do I make sure that people understand
how do you deal
abroad?
with that in a business school and looking at how businesses communicate, and we're looking at African businesses communicating with businesses elsewhere?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, as business is becoming more globalized, I think that's why there's such an interest around the world to understand doing business in Africa. Not just so they can do business here, but they understand the business mentality as it's done elsewhere as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much for talking to us, ma'am. That's Ms. Nora Brown, the Chief Operating Officer of GBSN. We thank you so much for your time here on Rendezvous Africa.